This is the Wooting 60HE, a keyboard that's been getting a lot of attention lately, and for good reason too. This isn't just your typical run-of-the-mill gaming keyboard. In fact, the features it has are so good, I wouldn't be surprised if every major keyboard brand started copying them. I've been using this keyboard for over 2 months now, and I'm quite impressed. But let's cut to the chase. Does this keyboard give you a competitive advantage over a typical gaming keyboard? In my opinion, yes. Yes, it does. But does that mean you should just go out and buy it immediately? Well, not necessarily, because at the end of the day, keyboards are only tools, and what really matters most is your individual performance and skill level. Now that said, here are the things that make this better than your typical gaming keyboard. Right away, one of the standout features of this keyboard is the fact that the switches allow you to customize and choose your own actuation point. And you can even do this for each separate key. Meaning you can make some keys like the movement keys, for example, have a super light actuation, and other keys like the Windows key or your in-game ultimate button have a more deliberate actuation. Also, when I say you can make some keys have a super light actuation, I mean super light. Their software allows you to set it anywhere from 4mm, which is all the way pressed down, to a mere 0.1mm, which is practically just touching the keys at that point. What's more is you can bind multiple actions to the same keystroke at different actuation points, meaning if it's part of the way pressed down, it can do something entirely different than when it's all the way pressed down. Now, you're probably thinking that's cool and all, but what's the big deal? I thought you said this keyboard was different. I know we've already seen the feature of being able to choose your own actuation point on the new SteelSeries and Razer keyboards, but something that this keyboard has that those keyboards don't is the ability to not only choose your actuation point, but to also choose their reset point. And this is where things start to get interesting. With a normal keyboard, you press the switch, it activates once it passes the actuation point, and you have to lift your finger and allow it to rise above the actuation point before you can activate it again. But with the Wooting 60HE, you're able to have a dynamic reset point, meaning instead of relying on the actuation point to be the variable to tell you when the key's ready to go again, you can instead use distance as the variable. And you can set this as low as 0.1mm for a ridiculously fast reset, which is what Wooting refers to as their rapid trigger feature. Not only is this very fun to do, but it also has quite a few use cases. And it can take your movement to a new level because the instant you lift your finger, the key will no longer be activated, which is very useful in a game like Valorant where you have to stop moving before you fire in order to be accurate. Or you could just learn to counter-strafe and not be such a big noob, but that's beside the point. I also noticed a difference right away in games that require a lot of strafing movements. It really seemed to help me in my dodging. You could say this is just a placebo effect, and it might honestly be, but either way, I got the feeling that my movements were more responsive and consistent. And just based off the way the technology works, this would make sense. So as you can see, the features of this keyboard have some serious potential to give you a slight competitive edge. But this keyboard has some pretty neat features for the more casual gamer as well. Because the switches use a magnet to read the keystrokes instead of an actual actuation point, it knows how far you're pressing the key at all times. And this allows you to treat your key press as if it were a controller, which is pretty nice for driving games because you can change the acceleration of your car based on how much you have the key pressed down. It also means in some games you can walk around instead of running everywhere. Also, while we're on the subject of running, this keyboard has a feature that lets you toggle a key on and off instead of needing to hold it down, so you could use this to make an auto run button for games that don't support one already. Or use it to prevent you from getting kicked for being AFK. Not that us gamers ever do that though. Yet another feature of this keyboard is what Wooting calls mod tap, which is similar to what I already talked about earlier when I mentioned you can bind multiple actions to the same keystroke, except this time the actions aren't based on the distance you press the key, it's instead based on how long you press the key. For example, I use this feature to give myself a makeshift arrow key section on this corner of the keyboard. If I hold them down, they act normally, but when I quickly tap them, they act like arrow keys. And I think this is honestly my favorite feature, because without it, I could never use a 60% keyboard for this long. And not only that, but the icing on the cake is you can use all these features without needing to install any bloatware or software. You can customize and fine-tune everything on their webpage. Alright, so that was a lot of features, and I'm sure by now you're probably wondering about the build quality and how it sounds. So take a listen. The build quality, I have to say, is quite good. There is a tiny bit of rattle from the keys, but that's to be expected on just about any keyboard. And in terms of the feel, the switches are really smooth. They do bottom out rather quickly at 4mm with just 60 centinewtons of actuation force. So even without all the fancy features, they are quite fast on their own. Some people are going to like that, and others maybe not so much. As far as the build quality on the actual casing, it's quite sturdy. There's no flexing and it has a decent amount of heft to it. It is worth mentioning that you could technically use this keyboard inside of your own PCB if you really wanted to, but for the average non-enthusiast, the casing is quite good already. Right now, this has to be my hands down #1 recommendation for a gaming keyboard, especially if you're a competitive person at any sort of level. Now, I do wish they had a 10 keyless version. That would truly be my personal ultimate keyboard, But as of right now, they only have a full version and a 60% version. And both are admittedly quite pricey, but as it stands right now, it also happens to be the best of the best. But if you're looking to find the best mouse for you, I've got some reviews on screen now.